before I start the discussion for today, I want you to ask yourselves on what makes us feel, think, and behave the way we do. You know what? Answering that questions actually means that human beings are fascinating, and through the help of psychology, we'll be able to understand those questions. And why is it that minsan, di ba, we wondered why other people can easily remember lots of dates so easily. Bakit mabilis lang sa kanila mag-memorize? Or kasi ako, di ba, I could just memorize my own number, but it's so hard for me to memorize yung ibang numbers. And why is it that I am a homebody habang yung best friend ko naman is life of the party? So there are lots of questions that comes to our mind in terms of on what we believe and on the perceptions that we have on different things. For this topic, it's very important to understand the psychological foundations of curriculum for us to be enlightened on how significant it is to consider what the perceptions of our students, the behavior, tsaka yung personality nila. When we say psychology, it's the scientific study of mental functions and behavior, including in perception, cognition, behavior, emotion, personality, and interpersonal relationships. So what does it mean by perception? Itong perception, it is the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through our senses, through our eyes, ears, or sense of touch, and etc. And we have the cognition, that it means the mental action or process of acquiring the knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. But it's centered on sa cognitive or dun sa brain. And then we have the behavior. It's the way in which one act or conduct oneself, especially towards others. Kaya maganda na sa foundations ng curriculum ay pag-aralan din natin yung mga perception, cognition, and behavior ng ating mga estudyante. And also sa emotion, which is the natural instinctive state of mind that's derived from one's circumstances, mood, or relationship with others. Kasi minsan, di ba, kahit gano'ng galing yung bata, there would be an instances na nagkakaroon siya ng mental block or any other difficulty dun sa learning nila. And then we have the personality that refers to the individual differences in characteristics, patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And lastly, yung sa interpersonal relationships, these are the social associations, yung connections or affiliations between two or more people. Pag-aaralan natin or we'll try to understand kung paano ba ma-develop yung skills ng bata, kung paano siya makitungo sa ibang tao. Now, let us learn on how curriculum started through the psychology foundations. We have here the behaviorism, the cognitivism, the humanism, and constructivism. And the proponents of each psychological perspective. Sa behaviorism, we have PAVLOV and Skinner. Sa cognitism naman, Kohler, Miller. Sa constructivism, Brunner, Piaget. And for humanism, we have Maslow and Rogers. So the one that I really love the most is dito sa humanism and even behaviorism. So it depends upon you naman kung what type of philosophy you are into. But this time, we'll be focusing to all the different psychological perspectives para alam natin kung ano yung magiging source ng ating curriculum na gagawin. Now, let's talk about the psychological perspectives. Let's start with behaviorism. Paano ba talaga tong behaviorism na to? In this approach, guys, it actually focuses on how one's environment and external stimuli impact a person's mental states and development. More importantly, it focuses on how these factors especially train us for the behaviors that we exhibit later on. Dito sasabihin na learning is considered a habit formation. The more na napapractice mo nga siya, the more na mas nagiging part na siya ng system mo, lalo na sa brain. I have here an example na sikat din siya na coach, si Jim Quick, if you are familiar with him. He was actually known as the boy with a broken dream. Imagine, bata pa lang siya. Sobrang hirap daw niya na makaintindi, or it's so hard for him to learn something. But if you could know him now, imagine naging isa na siyang learning expert, keynote speaker, trainer, and advisor. You could watch his videos sa YouTube. Meron din siyang books about how to maximize yung learning through a habit. Kaya for him, learning, it's somewhat like behaviorism type of approach kasi tinitrain talaga yung mind or nagkakaroon ng habit formation para mas natututo yung isang bata. And for us to teach and learn in a way that's desirable for our behavior. I have here an example of a situation in behaviorism approach wherein in this picture, the guy is the teacher and the girl at the back is the student. In this type of situation, there is a manipulation of stimulus and a desired response. The teacher has said to the student that if you complete all your homework and assignments, I will drop your lowest grade. So it's in that way, yung teacher ay minamanipulate niya yung stimulus para sa desired response ng estudyante na ipasa niya talaga, at that student will be thinking na kailangan niyang gawin talaga yung pinapagawa ng teacher niya, or else hindi talaga idadrop ng teacher yung lowest grade niya. In this situation, the behaviorists believe that behavior can be conditioned by altering the environment. Kaya minsan ginagamit din talaga natin siya even nowadays, di lang before, but always, most of the time, ginagamit siya kung saan halos may kapalit lahat ng ginagawa, diba? And in this way, meron din siya talaga na negative or disadvantages. I have here a specific situation then wherein yung puppy tsaka yung nanay niya are talking. Tapos yung amo nila, the mother said, they give you a lot of treats while they're training you, so play dumb for as long as you can. It means lang naman, somewhat like a humor lang naman siya, na has a meaning also kung saan na minsan sa sobrang dami ng rewards para lang gawin yung isang bagay, even for children, diba? Kung nasasanay na sila na sa lahat ng ginagawa nila, there's a reward. After it, nagpo-focus, yung motivation nila ay based lang dun sa external. What if kung walang reward, diba? Ibig sabihin ba nun, wala na silang choice within them na gagawin nila. It means wala na yung internal motivation, hindi na siya masyadong nade-develop. Now, let's talk about the proponents and their behaviorism. Sino-sino to sila? We have Ivan Pavlov, the Russian psychologist, who introduced the theory of classical conditioning. Now, let's talk about the proponents under behaviorism. So, sino-sino tong mga taong to na part ng proponent or ng behaviorism na to? We have Pavlov, who was a Russian psychologist and the one who introduced the theory of classical conditioning. Alam natin tong classical conditioning na to once we remember lang yung sa Bell and the Dog, but I'll be discussing it later on. Another then na nabigay niya or na-contribute niya is he showed that an organism can associate a particular stimulus with a particular response. Nag-e-exist yung stimulus para sa response or hindi nagkakaroon ng response pag walang stimulus. Yun yung gusto na ipahabuatig ni Pavlov. And therefore, learning is the result of an association formed between a stimulus and a response. In this way, nagiging foundation din siya ng curriculum kasi, di ba pag learning, how are you going, since learning is a product itself, paano nagkakaroon ng learning ang isang bata? So, it's the response. So, there should be a stimulus na dapat gawin para nagkakaroon ng response, which is learning. And
Classical conditioning was done by Ivan Pavlov in the 1890s. During this time, Pavlov did a lot of research around the digestive processes of dogs. Pavlov called the food an unconditioned stimulus because its effects on the dog were not learned. Instead, they triggered an unconditioned response that happened naturally and completely out of the dog's control. The metronome is at first a neutral stimulus. Through the process of repetitive pairing with food, the dog learns to connect the two. This means that the neutral stimulus becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the response to that, a conditioned response.
let's talk about Edward Thorndike. He was the one who proposed 3 laws. We have the law of effect, the law of readiness, and the law of exercise. Now, let's start with the law of effect. According kay Thorndike, it's the response that is reinforced, which is the positive, will become habitual. So, the more na ma-positive yung stimuli mo, mas nagiging paulit-ulit yung, or nagiging habitual yung positive response din nung ng bata or ng tao. Here is the given example to present his idea about it para ma-validate niya talaga. He placed cats in wooden puzzle box where they had to get out by pressing the lever. So the behavior followed by reward is more likely to reoccur. Habang binibigyan sila ng positive reward, mas inuulit-ulit na pinipindot nung cat yung lever. Tapos, yung behavior followed by unfavorable consequences naman that less likely occur. Ang gustong iparating naman dito ni Thorndike ay mas maganda pag tayo ay may pinapagawa sa estudyante or sa ating mga anak, mas maganda na positive yung reinforcement natin. Kasi mas umuulit yung or naging habitual yung behavior na pinapakita ng bata. Kaysa naman, pag negative naman kasi, more on takot yung nadidevelop sa learner, diba? Kaya mas magandang positive na reinforcement. Yun yung law of effect. And another thing, sa law of exercise naman niya, it means that the connection bet, which is the stimulus and response, will be strengthened with practice. The more na i-exercise mo naman talaga or lagi mo inuulit yung isang bagay, diba? Yung response will be strengthened. Mas nagde-develop siya or there's always an improvement. The law of exercise had 2 parts. The first one is the law of use and the law of disuse. This law stated that connections grow stronger when used, where strength is defined as vigor and duration as well as the frequency of its making, and grow weaker when not used. This law of exercise can be practiced or halos nakikita natin na nababalidate talaga siya sa mga games, diba? Or sa mga skills or talents ng isang tao. The more na napapractice mo talaga siya, the more na nagde-develop. Pero pag you're not doing anything to improve it or pinapabayaan mo na lang na mawala yung talent mo, it will actually become weaker in time. Kaya dito sa law of exercise, nagagamit din siya sa curriculum. Kasi the more na may mga exercises or different types of activities na pinoprovide ang isang teacher, mas nagiging maganda yung effect or yung mas nagkakaroon ng learning yung mga bata. And lastly naman, yung law of readiness, para sa kanya, it's a certain behaviors are more likely to be learned than others because the nervous system of the organism is ready to make the connection, leading to a satisfying state of affairs. This one is a great thing then halos kinoconsider naman most of the time sa curriculum natin, di ba? Di naman pwede na ang isang grade 1 student ay tuturuan mo na ng mga algebra, 'di ba? Of course, di pa sila ready nun. Kaya dito sa kay Thorndike, maganda yung law of readiness. Iko-consider natin yung nervous system ng bata kung kaya na ba talaga niya. Kasi minsan yung mga bagay na pinipilit talaga na ipaintindi sa bata, even if they don't have that state of readiness yet, could greatly affect their brain. Kaya imbis na nakakatulong tayo or we provide the learning, we could just destroy someone's mindset or yung brain nila. Kaya we have to, before we teach a subject or a certain topic, dapat may readiness yung estudyante. Kaya diba sa K-12 na curriculum, it's a spiral type of curriculum kasi nagsisimula siya dun sa mga simple na topics hanggang sa pahirap na siya ng pahirap. Kasi kinoconsider nila yung law of readiness ng bata. Kaya hindi mo pwedeng you jump to the hardest subject. It should start with the lowest one. And for him, yung law of readiness is when someone is ready to perform some act, to do so is satisfying. Alam mo naman din yun sa sarili mo, diba? Na pag it's so satisfying if alam mo sa sarili mo na ready ka na. Kaysa yung sa hindi ka pa ready tapos binigla ka. It could affect your performance. And when someone is ready to perform some act, not to do so is annoying. Ayun, kung kailan ready ka na, tapos hindi naman matutuloy, it's really annoying, di ba? Parang ano na yan, nakabihis ka na lahat-lahat, tapos hindi ka pala kasama sa, sa gala or sa lakad. And the third one is when someone is not ready to perform some act and is forced to do so, it is annoying. Yun, pag ipipilit ka naman talagang gawin yung isang bagay, tapos hindi ka pa ready, di ba? It's somewhat annoying talaga or nakakainis talaga yung ganong bagay. Kaya, in this type of law, guys, bakit natin siya pinag-aaralan? Kasi sa curriculum, dapat pag gumagawa tayo, i-consider natin na nasusunod or napiprepare natin yung mga estudyante. Diba sa first one na sinabi ni THORNDIKE ay yung law of effect. Pag ikaw yung teacher, mas maganda pala talaga pag may pinapagawa ka sa kanila ay more on positive reinforcement. Halimbawa, kung sino yung pinaka-behave, may additional points. Or kaysa yung sasabihin ng isang teacher na, yung mga maiingay ay late na uuwi. Alam mo yun, mas less daw yung occurrence ng response kasi negative. Pero pag positive, if ever na kung sino yung mga behave ang maagang umuwi, so mas madami yung magpa-practice or mas magbe-behave kasi they are aiming for that positive na yung positive na reward. And we have here then sa law of exercise na before for us to consider yung mastery ng learning ng bata, dapat magpo-provide tayo ng exercises for them para mas ma-develop at to make sure na mas lifelong yung learning nila. And then, dito sa law of readiness naman, we have to be considerate sa kung ano yung nararamdaman ng estudyante natin if they are ready mentally or physically. Kaya sa pagbibigay ng mga activities talaga, before you give yung mabigat na individual type, di ba, sa thesis, sa writing or doing thesis, mahirap yun na pag ibigla mo yung estudyante na individual agad. Of course, we need to start sa group muna or with assistance ng isang teacher para na-develop yung or nagkakaroon tayo ng we follow the law of readiness para i-prepare sila for that certain ending na magpe-present sila individually ng thesis nila. Kasi in this way, mas magiging maganda yung performance ng mga estudyante. And you know what, guys, lagi itong lumalabas sa let, yung kay Edward Thorndike na to, kasi it's actually a good law na may magandang effect din talaga sa learning even nowadays sa mga 21st century learners natin. And we also have a B.F. Skinner, siya naman yung sa operant conditioning, wherein when a particular response or behavior is reinforced or rewarded, the individual is conditioned to respond. No wonder naman talaga pag rewarded yung reinforcement, mas nakakaroon ng response. Here is the certain situation na ginawa ng B.F. Skinner kung saan sabi niya the positive and the negative reinforcement. Skinner's operant conditioning chamber, also called as Skinner's box, was designed to teach rats how to push a lever. This behavior is not natural to rats, so operant conditioning with positive and negative reinforcement were performed in order to teach the behavior. Pag dito kasi pag operant conditioning, there's a certain behavior na hindi natural. Tapos, nagkakaroon ng positive and negative reinforcement para lang ma-perform nila yung behavior na gusto nating mangyari. Dito, sa rat na to, yung positive reinforcement na ginawa niya, the rat was awarded with food when he pressed the lever. Habang negative ang reinforcement naman, a rat was able to turn off the electric shocks produced by the floor by pressing the lever. So it both has behavior na piniperform ng rat. Lagi niyang pinipindot yung lever. So merong positive and negative reinforcement na nangyayari, which actually has both effect. Hindi tulad dun kay sa law of effect ni Thorndike na pag positive, mas umuulit yung pangyayari. Pag dito naman sa operant conditioning, since certain behavior is not natural, maganda na ginamitan niya ng positive tsaka negative reinforcement. And for cognitivism naman, what does it mean? When we say cognitivism type of foundation sa curriculum, maganda rin din to siya na foundation kasi it shifts away from conditioned behavior and psychoanalytic notions to the study of how our mind actually works, how we process information, and how we use that process information to drive our behavior. Dito sa approach na to, in contrast to behaviorists, ang cognitive psychologists believe that your behavior is determined by your expectations tsaka sa emotions mo. Pag cognitive psychologists like Jean Piaget, they argue that you remember things based on what you already know. Kasi nandun yung nadadagdagan na lang yung information. And you also solve problems based on your memory of past experiences. Dito sa cognitive, or yung sinasabi kasi ni Jean Piaget, di ba, hindi mo naman talaga may explain ang isang bagay na hindi mo naman na-experience or you don't have that type of situation yet. For example, a kid or ang grade 1 pupil ay hindi makakapag-describe kung ano yung marriage if hindi pa naman talaga niya na-experience, diba? Yun yung sinasabi na cognitivism. And cognitivists emphasize that learning is primarily cognitive in nature. Pag it's more on sa mind talaga yung learning. So with this approach or with this type of foundation, they turn away from people as machines without free will and back into thoughts and feelings. How you act is based upon expectations of our upcoming party, will affect how you feel and act while you're in there, and will color your memory of the night after you return home. Ibig sabihin, mas nadadagdagan. Once we experience it, kasi mas cognitive, nasa mind na, yun yung learning na sinasabi. Now, let's learn kung sino yung mga proponents dito sa cognitivism. By the way, the cognitivism is growth and development that refers to changes in the structure and functions of human characteristics. Let's start with Jean Piaget. For him, he was the one who introduced the theory of cognitive development theory. Dito yung pagkakasunod-sunod niya. We have the first one, sensory motor, the pre-operational, the concrete, and formal operations. We discussed it before sa child and adolescent development, diba? Ito yung na-remind ko sa inyo before na makikilala at makikilala niyo pa rin itong mga taong to hanggang sa 4th year kayo or hanggang sa maglet tsaka magtuturo ay applicable talaga siya sa atin na mga teachers. Let's start with the sensory motor. What does it mean? It is the perception of the environment through the senses. From the word sense, diba? Sensory motor, sense. It's more in the sense of touch, hearing, smell, kung based lang dun sa nakikita na hawakan or naaamoy. Yun yung sa sensory motor. So, more on sa mga bata, yan siya. I know you're familiar kung what mga age yan. This is just for a review para dun sa stages ng development, okay? And sa pre-operational naman, it's the ability to store the words and language increases. So, mas nagkakaroon na ng development yung brain ng bata. Kaya, nag-i-increase din yung knowledge niya. Pag sa concrete operations naman, it develop logical thinking in relations to functions. Dito yung mga questioning age ng mga bata na laging bakit? Parang Olaf type of question. Why? There are lots of questions na gusto nilang may sagot dapat. And we should not deprive those children or yung mga bata with the answers that they want. Kasi minsan pag kinakat natin sila sa mga tanong nila, we actually deprive them from learning tapos we stop na i-develop yung brain nila. Kaya mas maganda na mas na-improve or mas napapractice nila yung questioning skills nila and we try to give them the answers. Kasi dito na yung nagde-develop yung logical thinking nila eh. Pangit naman yun pag we try to destroy it, yung development, imbes na we are the one who help them to build yung logical thinking. Tayo pa yung sisira dun sa questioning age moment nila. And the formal operations, ito na yung sa mga high school, the hypothesis, testing, abstract thinking, and maturity. Diba, yung sabi nga ni John Piaget kanina, na sa cognitivism talaga, mas maganda that they already have the knowledge or experience. And in this way, yung sa formal operations naman talaga, ay nagkakaroon sila ng abstract thinking once na nagkaroon na ng development sa sensory motor, the pre-operational, tsaka dun sa concrete operations nila. Okay? And let's talk about constructivism naman tayo. What does it mean by constructivism? It is where learning involves the construction of new understanding by combining prior learning with new information. So, meron na siyang understanding tapos i-combine lang yung prior learning niya with new information. So, from the word construct, yun yung may construction ay may pagsasama ng learning. Okay? And knowledge is constructed in the mind of the learner. Of course, di naman pwede na lahat na lang si teacher. Kaya mas maganda dito sa constructivism kasi we consider the learner itself. It's more on learner-centered, kaya learning is active. You let the students or learners to experience. Kaya dito yung sinasabi na foundation ng curriculum na meron tayo ngayon na naging source din. Kasi sa K-12 learning for 21st century learners, it's more on learning by doing. Dito sa constructivism, learning is more active. And now, let's talk about humanism. So what I said earlier, ito yung gusto ko na foundation of curriculum. Kasi it's more on a learner-centered type of foundation. Humanism, the learner is a person who has feelings, attitudes, and emotions. Kaya nako-consider kung ano yung nararamdaman ng bata or humanism type of foundation of the curriculum. Let's learn on how it is used dito sa curriculum natin. In humanism, the learner is a person who has feelings, attitudes, and emotions, and past experiences such as failing grades have a huge impact on the student's current inability to learn. Kaya gustong-gusto ko, di ba na-mention ko din kanina na gustong-gusto ko din tong humanism type of or foundations, sa psychological foundations ng curriculum kasi it's more on learner-centered. Tapos, kino-consider talaga ang individuality ng isang bata. And imagine this one, diba? Yung you consider yung kahit yung pagkaroon ng failing grade ng isang bata ay could have a huge impact, not just the current inability to learn, but for his or her whole life, di ba? Kaya mahirap talaga na we as a teachers will provide grade or ibabagsak natin yung estudyante natin without giving proper help, lalo na sa mga high school or even dun sa mga elementary students. So we have to be careful. Yun yung mindset sa humanism. Ang dito kasi sa humanistic approach or dito sa humanistic psychologist, for them, they believe that you're essentially good and that you're motivated to realize your full potential. Lahat ng tao ay may full potential. Kailangan lang talaga i-develop for the humanistic psychologist. The psychologists from this camp also focus on how you can feel good about yourself by fulfilling your needs and goals. Kasi if you're doing something naman talaga na hindi naman kasama sa goal mo or sa needs mo, it's not that fulfilling, di ba? But for the humanistic approach or sa psychology na to, yun yung gusto nila na i-consider. Like for example, ng prominent humanistic psychologist na i-discuss natin is si Carl Rogers, wherein he called his patients na client and offered a supportive environment wherein yung mga clients niya ay magkakaroon ng insight into their own feelings. Magkakaiba yung humanism na to sa behaviorism kasi yung sa humanistic approach or sa psychology, it works on individual empowerment. Whether you are right or not, in a larger sense, you are motivated to be the best person you can be. And your choices come from trying to improve your life, which is different talaga sa behaviorism kasi merong stimulus tsaka merong response. Kailangan na i-control kung positive ba or negative yung magiging effect. At dito sa humanism, imagine nyo guys, certain example is instead of saying or sabihan mo na tigilan na ng pag-inom ng taong yan, for them, sa humanism, they're just encouraging support to that person without directly advising to quit or try to analyze why you drink in the first place. Ipapa-analyze na bakit kaya? Bakit gusto mo mag-inom? Or why is it that you're doing that? In that way, you let that client or yung taong yan or the person or student to realize what he or she is doing is wrong. Hindi mo talaga direct sa behaviorism kasi 'di ba? Since you're expecting for a response, dapat may stimuli ka na or papagawa ka sa kanila. Okay? And for dito naman tayo kay Abraham Maslow. I know you commonly hear him or this person most of the time, yung sa hierarchy of needs niya, wherein lower levels must be satisfied first before one could function at the higher levels. May pagkakasunod-sunod yung hierarchy of needs na yan na dapat daw nating sundin. In this way, humanism type of approach din siya. Kasi you are treating or inuuna mo yung kapakanan ng estudyante or learner mo. And for the schools, cannot control all the influence that on the learner, but they can create an atmosphere of trust, warmth, and care. Tama nga naman, hindi lahat talaga ay napoprovide ng school. But then, we could create an atmosphere, yun yung sinasabi na ang school dapat ay nagpo-provide ng conducive type of environment wherein mas marami yung learning na natutunan yung mga estudyante natin. Ito guys ang mahiwagang hierarchy of needs ni Maslow. It is a motivational theory talaga in psychology that comprises a 5-tier model of human needs that often depicted as hierarchical levels within a pyramid. We have the physiological needs, kasama dito yung food, water, warmth, and rest. And we have the next one. The next are the safety needs, the security and safety, then the belongingness and love needs, the intimate relationship, friends, esteem needs, the prestige and feeling of accomplishments, and lastly, yung self-actualization, wherein it means the fulfillment needs, achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. The reason that it used this type of kaya siya pyramid kasi it needs lower down in the hierarchy must be satisfied before individuals can attend to the needs higher up. You can't have the self-fulfillment needs or the self-actualization na final without having the physiological needs. Kung wala ka namang pagkain or sobrang uhaw ka, di ba? It doesn't matter to you. But if it is already satisfied yung sa bottom part na physiological needs, it will move to the safety needs. Tapos pag na-complete na yung ano na yan, yung apat na yan, that's the time na that person will have an self-actualization, achieving one's full potential, including creative activities. And this way, guys, mahalaga siya sa foundation ng curriculum na pwede natin magamit kasi bawa sa realidad talaga nangyayari siya na pag merong deficiency sa needs or sa physiological needs, paano nagkakaroon ng learning naman talaga yung bata, di ba? Nagkakaroon ng problema doon. And Maslow initially stated that individuals must satisfy lower level deficit needs before progressing on to meet higher level growth needs. Kaya, when the deficit need has been more or less satisfied, it will go away and our activities become habitually directed towards meeting the next set of needs. And growth needs do not stem from a lack of something but rather from a desire to grow as a person. Kaya 'di ba yung self-actualization yung nasa pinakalas or yung highest level. And every person for him is capable and has the desire to move up the hierarchy towards a level of self-actualization. Unfortunately, progress is often disrupted by a failure to meet yung lower needs. Kasi kung nagkakaproblema na nga sa physiological needs, which is the basic na pangangailangan talaga, di ba? Paano magkakaroon ng self-fulfillment nga yung isang tao, di ba? And therefore, not everyone will move through the hierarchy in a unidirectional manner but may move back and forth between the different types of needs. Hindi na maintain na palagi na lang nasa self-fulfillment needs yung isang tao. Minsan talaga, nasa gitna, may pagkukulang sa gitna or dun sa pinakadulo. In this way, it's for us to understand kung gaano kahalaga yung i-consider mo yung buong pagkatao ng isang individual for you to understand at para magkakaroon talaga ng improvement or self-fulfillment ang isang bata or yung isang estudyante. For this, dito kasi sa self-actualization, guys, or dito kasi sa hierarchy of needs ni Maslow, human beings are motivated by hierarchy of needs. Namomotivate tayo sa lahat ng bagay dahil dito sa limang yan. And it is important to note that Maslow's 1940-1945 five-stage model has been expanded to include na yung cognitive tsaka aesthetic needs noong 1970 and later transcendence needs noong 1970B. Ito yung mga changes of original five-stage model. Meron ng biological and physiological needs. Hindi lang siya physiological. Tapos next, yung safety needs. Even yung freedom from fear ay kasama na din. And then, yung love and belongingness. It's about affiliating, also being a part of a group. Hindi lang sa friends or sa intimate relationship. Tapos dito sa esteem needs naman, he classified it into two categories. May esteem for oneself or yung para sa dignity, sa achievement and mastery. Tapos yung desire for reputation or respect from others. This is the current or pinakabagong hierarchy of needs ni Maslow, guys. Kung makita natin, nadagdag na yung self-transcendence needs. And lastly, kay Carl Rogers, ito yung, siya talaga yung pinakasikat in terms of humanism. He is more on to the client-centered therapy. Kaya siya client-centered kasi diba, yung kay Carl Rogers talaga, ang tawag niya sa mga patients niya ay client. He proposed that classrooms should become learner-centered and the teachers should facilitate learning. Ayun, ito na yung, this is one of the foundation na kukuhanan ng K-12 curriculum. Kaya naging pag learner-centered talaga ang isang curriculum, it should be teachers are only facilitators of learning. Kaya we are only facilitators of learning for the 21st century learners, lalo na pag ang curriculum ay learner-centered. Okay, so you could have a research more, or if you want to learn about these foundations, guys, you can have or read a curriculum foundations and principles and issues. So meron din naman yun online, or you could use a link to read more about the different foundations of, or the psychological foundations of curriculum. Okay, thank you so much, guys, for listening. I hope that you learned something more about the psychological foundations. And later on, I'll be discussing about the different or the historical and sociological foundations of the curriculum, lalong-lalo na sa Pilipinas. Thank you!